So hi, Kate. Thanks so much for joining me today from London.
Thank you, Micaela. Great to see you.
So I want to start this interview, which is for the Future Social Service Institute's newsletter, by acknowledging that I'm meeting on Aboriginal land. I'm on the land of the Wadawurrung people on the Victorian coast, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that a lot of FISI's work is about what can we do to address the generational disadvantage that has been, and empower future leaders to support their communities. So Kate, I want to talk to you a bit about your leadership journey, and you've had an incredibly inspiring career, and you've made some really profound impacts and contributions, particularly around ending violence against women and advocating for human rights in the work that you've done. You now hold one of the most senior roles in the United Nations as the Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights. But you started your career as a coordinator at the Royal Women's Hospital and helped establish Australia's first Centre Against Sexual Assault in the 90s. It was great doing the research for your bio. I didn't realise that you'd played such a significant role in that. So Kate, thank you for contribution to what is now a very important and significant sector. You were CEO at Broadmeadows Community Health Centre, which was the largest in Australia at the time, and then held leadership roles in Amnesty, both here in Australia and in London. So that's a significant leadership journey. And I know that a lot of the people that read this newsletter are thinking about their own leadership journey. So I'm curious about what's guided and inspired and nurtured you on your leadership journey.
Well, thank you, Micaela, and thank you so much for thinking of me in regards to this important series. I should perhaps confess that I have stepped down as a Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, and am now a little freer of that burden, although that's still it's a very strong and recent memory. Throughout my life, I guess it was how I felt when I was 18 or 19 or so, when I would see that as the moment where I was clearest in my anger and my fury at the fundamental injustices of sexism and racism. And I remember being utterly appalled that things such as the colour of one's skin or the language that one spoke at home or one's genitalia were so determinative of future, of opportunity, of standing and status. I absolutely, as a young woman, couldn't get my head around it. And I remember being sort of incandescent with rage about it and directing that somewhat inappropriately at my parents, but nonetheless as a fire within. And I am thoroughly and absolutely imperfect, but that said, I've tried to be answerable to many things, but particularly to that 18-year-old who, in my mind's eye, I try not to make her ashamed. And this has been a journey throughout life to figure out rage as fuel and to keep that burning bright as an honesty point in one's life, but to be smart tactically and strategically about the vehicle that you are and the journey that you take. But fuel is mightily important. It needs to be renewable. And it needs to be directed constructively. But that's how I think of myself being guided, if you like.
That's fantastic, Kate, because if you think about the young women that have stepped up in our world lately, and their fire and outrage, and how important that has been. Young people leading climate movement, young people speaking up about racism and disadvantage. That's a really good call out to hold that as a bit of a guiding.
And I loved what you said at the beginning, because it opens the door to us understanding that we haven't done intergenerational work properly or well, of the many frontiers ahead of us yet to be breached. I think bridging old people with that youth renewable energy is one of the greatest challenges we've yet to meet, and it cannot involve us who are the unyoung. It can't involve us damping down that rage or insisting upon tidiness and politeness and accepting what is unacceptable. It is in the actions that often we engage in as we professionalize ourselves to sort of smooth out the edges of our rage. That's where often unconscionable, appalling compromise is made. So I think both in policy and practice, but also in theorizing, we have to do much more contemplative work about how to get that right. And I think that partnership with young people as leaders and as actors and agents of change is our singular greatest hope, provided we, the non-young, step out of the way and stop our dominating discourse of what they see more purely and more cleanly as outrageous. But when I think about it, I really feel deep in my belly that this is something that we've got to do far better at.
Yes, well, that's a very good rallying call. I think you're right about, because you do reflecting back on that, and I agree with the energy that fuels this work is critical, because it's very tiring work over a long period of time to be involved in it, and caring for ourselves and our communities is a really critical thing to also keep in mind, and keeping the fuel up. So my other question to you then is, what are your top tips for leaders during very significant times of transformation and change?
Yeah, thank you. I think the first thing is that renewable energy. I think understand your own fragility in this era of massive change, and figure out what it is that you should be doing in a disciplined way to self-sustain, in order that you don't seek sustenance for yourself in ways that are inappropriate, either through asking teams too much of teams, expecting people to adulate you, or other sorts of practices that broadly are self-harming, or at least broadly are undermining of your own well-being, both internally, physically, and in relationship to others. So I do think that we're all very affected, of course, by this extraordinary era of unpredictability and disruptive change, and to be aware of how we're travelling in that, I think is just a primary condition. It may not be the most important thing, but it's an essential condition. My second tip is live in awareness of mission and vision as a leader, rather than detail and the daily contest of operations and the more technical elements of one's work. If you don't really sort of cleave to, like really hold to why you're doing this work and where you want to go, then you will get how we do it and who we are as we do it wrong. And many people in a group where leaders, many others, can hold the how and the where and the when. But the leader uniquely, not singularly, but must be at least one person who holds why and what the destination story is, which I would call vision. I think often and it's tough for feminists in particular, I would say, because we rightly hold to the idea that how we go about our work is as important as what we dream of achieving. And I'd say that's true. But I think at times we've overprivileged our own comfort in that how we go about our work and our own relationships. We've avoided conflict, we've avoided texture, we've avoided grit, and in doing so, we failed to recall it isn't our job, I believe, as feminist leaders, to make the work experience for ourselves the best that it can be. That's not actually our job. Our job is to change the world in terms of gender inequality, oppression and repression. And we have to ask more of ourselves. And something I feel very strongly about is that somehow this professionalizing of the sector and our expectation that our terms and conditions be great, that our salaries be fair and just, that we be treated with respect, that as important as those things are, sometimes have become more important than the change we're delivering. And that's not okay. That's really not okay. And it's up to leaders to hold our raison d'etre, the vision and mission, absolutely up to the fore, at risk of staff and colleagues at times feeling that we're seeing things differently. I think as leaders, it is our job to see things differently and to value that and to create the tension of pulling people forward in terms of where we want to go. Look, and my third thing, therefore, in that journey is to brace oneself for being unpopular and to brace oneself for not always being well understood and appreciated. And I think if it doesn't mean that you're insensitive to your impact on others. To the contrary, it means being very tuned in. And it doesn't mean that you don't want to be appreciated. We all do. But at some point, you cannot expect an organisation, particularly constituted in societies as we have them today, societies ridden with inequality, with injustice, with racism and with sexism. You can't look to an organisation to produce a perfect account of who you are or to produce a perfect appreciation of who you are. So you must understand there'll be red lines. There'll be times when organisations betray you, let you down, when systems utterly do not align with that mission and vision that I was talking about. And you need to know where the edges of your tolerance for that are and be ready to step over the edge if necessary, rather than stay in organisations and complain and whinge and repeat how miserable and awful you are. It is a given that the organisation will fail you. It's a given because we're part of a system. So if you feel utterly depleted, get out. If you feel utterly undervalued, please leave. If you feel utterly wasted, don't stay there. Get out and move on. And most of us, frankly, in professional terms, have those choices. But when we choose not to exercise that, I frankly feel we're part of the problem. And they're the three things that I would really advocate for greater attention to. They're not necessarily the most important things, but I think they're amongst the most neglected things.
Yeah, I absolutely. Thank you very much, Kate. And thank you for your energy. I really, the stepping over the edge, I will remember from this conversation, and the fuel that rage give you. But what the rallying cry for feminist leaders that you've talked about will be very well received, I'm sure. Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you, Micaela. It's been a joy.